Bulavinakana, good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to acknowledge, of course, the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Fiji, all the other panelists, Minister Khoya, of course, Minister of Commerce, Trade and Tourism and Transport, the President of Fiji Chamber, all the other invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm told that I'm supposed to set the scene before the panelists speak. So I just wanted to give you a very quick summary in respect of where we are as an economy. As you know, that the mini budget is to be delivered on the 24th of March at 7:30 p.m. We've been going around Fiji essentially to nooks and crannies of Fiji, not everywhere. Unfortunately, we cannot go everywhere. Essentially seeking public submissions from people directly, and also, of course, conveying to them the economic situation in Fiji. Indeed, where the economy was prior to COVID, where it was during COVID, and I suppose we can now say post-COVID period. Essentially, we've grown for 9 years prior to COVID. Our visitor numbers were about 897,000 tourism arrivals in 2019. It plummeted to 147,000 in 2020, and last year with 32,000 visitors in Fiji. This year we expected to grow by 1,300%, because we're expecting 447,000 visitors this year. Of course, we're starting from a very low base. But the opening of the borders essentially has meant that there is a bit more robustness in the economy. And tourism, of course, is a major driver of the economy in Fiji, notwithstanding that there are a number of other sectors that do contribute to economic growth in Fiji. And as a government, our strategy has always been to try and diversify the economy. In other words, grow more sectors and not simply be dependent on one or two sectors for economic growth. And in fact, that has happened progressively and indeed in a very solid footing. During the period of COVID, we had over 100,000 Fijians who lost their jobs or had reduced hours. In that period, however, there were about 3,000 new jobs created in the BPO sector. In last year's budget, we allocated $300,000 to the BPO Council. The Australian government also, through its agencies, are working with us, working with the BPO Council. They see enormous potential. The projections by some of the experts are that there's a potential of about 100,000 jobs being created in the next 10 years in the BPO sector. What has led to this is fundamentally the enormous levels of infrastructure investment that has been made by government in the telecommunications space, the huge levels of investment in respect of the personnel build that has taken place. We have also expended funds in the Southern Cross cable. The next gen cable has landed here. Government put forward $20 million in that respect. We've got that refund for that. And we all speak English. And apparently we all have neutral accents. So people can understand us a lot better, and a Brit, an Aussie, a Kiwi, and Yank can understand us a lot better. They don't have to spend millions of dollars getting our people to change their accents so they can understand them. And we lie on the 180-degree meridian. We essentially are on the international dateline, 12 hours behind or ahead of Greenwich Mean Time. These are some of the natural advantages we have, and we of course want to build upon that. So 3,000 jobs were created in that space. So from one perspective, you can look at the glass as half full, because there has been a lot of positivity that has come out of the pandemic. Yes, people have lost jobs. That could not be helped. That's now in the past. Yes, businesses have slowed down. Yes, some have completely shut down. But we need to learn from what has actually happened. We need to be able to build the capacity. We need to be able to ensure that our financial institutions are, of course, are not more robust. We need to ensure that the laws that are in place are a lot more flexible to be able to cater for such situations. I mean, a very simple example is that a person who had a liquor license, even a hotelier who had a liquor license, and if they did not use the liquor license in one particular year and came for renewal, because they did not seek renewal in the previous year, you have to go through the entire application process again, as if you're a new applicant. So we actually had to go to Parliament to amend the law to make sure that people who, in fact, were previously license holders could get their licenses renewed as opposed to being treated as a new applicant. So the number of learnings have actually come out from that, how laws need to be a lot more flexible. Going forward, of course, as you know, before that, in the period when COVID actually struck us, we had the borders, of course, shut down. Government's revenue went basically down to 50% with question in a matter of weeks. We, of course, had our tax revenues completely got eradicated by 50%. 100,000 people lost jobs. Foreign exchange vulnerability could have been a possibility if we did not put in place the strategic decisions we put in place. And as a result of the decisions we did make, initially people did not know how long it was going to last. The borders will be shut down for how long? Are we all going to die off like flies? It's going to take 6 months, 3 months, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. Nobody knew about that in the beginning. And of course, as the science developed, we got more information. But as a government, we had to make some strategic decisions. We had to ensure that we continued with certain policies notwithstanding what was happening. So basic socioeconomic policies remained in place, like free education. Today we now have more girls in schools, in primary school and high school than males. We have more females in universities than males. So those strategic policies were put in place. We continued with those policies. We also ensured that the social welfare benefits continued. Rural pregnant women still continue to get their food vouchers. Disability allowance still continued. Social pension, there are many people in Fiji who have never worked formally for anybody, yet they have eked out a living for their entire lives. They either sell vegetables by the roadside or grow cassava and dalo and sell it by the roadside, or people who go around selling bean peanuts or boiled EV or whatever the case may be. There's over 130,000 people who are engaged in the informal sector. They, of course, lived off the people who worked in the hotel industry. The example that I've been using in this budget consultation, I've just come back from one with a number of women organizations had in Coronivia. And as I was mentioning to them, before you enter Nandi Airport, on the right-hand side you'll see the bus shelter, nice bus shelter, but you have lots of trees. Before COVID struck, there were lots of people who used to sell lovo packs, who used to sell roti parcel, mithai, boiled EV, etc. Their customers weren't the tourists. Their customers were actually the AFL workers. The same group of people or another group of people sold their products to people who worked outside Fiji Airways or outside ATS. They overnight lost their sources of income. So in government's policy agenda to ensure that people got what we call unemployment benefits during COVID, members of FNPF were allowed to access their general account. If the funds were finished, then government paid them $220 a fortnight. Those people in the formal sector obviously could not be helped through the FNPF accounts because they don't have any. So we had the rounds of, the $90, the 2 rounds of $50, the 2 rounds of $360. We had soft loans that were given through the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Tourism year before last. And of course, in this year's budget that was announced, we have a $200 million loan facility where RBF lends to the bank at 0.25%, where they on-lend to customers under this scheme at no more than 3.99%. The interest rate for the first 2 years is paid by government on behalf of the loan recipients, and in the third year then they do their principal payments and interest rate payments. This is essentially to help people get back on their feet. So a number of these type of initiatives were actually put up, which actually flushed money into the economy. With an economy that's already constrained because of COVID, and in fact constricted by 15.2%. Obviously, if that type of Keynesian approach to economics was not implemented, the economy would have shrunk even further. And would have been a lot more socioeconomic disparity, and a lot more despondency of people, in particular those in the margins of society. So these are all the sort of policies that were put in place. Very basic policies like market vendors getting their stall fees paid for the whole year. We're paying that to the municipal councils that of course provide relief to those people. Fishermen and fisherwomen getting their licenses renewed. We paid their fees for this year. Taxi drivers who had PSV licenses, bus drivers, etc., their license renewals were paid for us this year. It assisted people. It also injected funds into the economy. But what we also saw during that period, as highlighted by the President of the Chamber, We saw a lot of uptake of technology. People started having Zoom meetings, etc., and people therefore, of course, saw new ways of doing business. All of the social benefits that we paid out, the unemployment benefits, approximately, apart from the FNPF, if you take out $200 million from that, you're looking at around about $250 million that was paid out purely on the phones. Applications were on the phones. It took no more than 3 minutes for people to actually apply on their phones. They did not have to go and queue outside the DO's office or the Ministry of Poverty Alleviation, etc. Took 3 minutes to fill it out, and the monies were paid to them within seconds. We could have disbursed $106 million in the first round of 360 on the first day, but we didn't, because we knew everybody would go and queue up outside Digicel and Vodafone. But the fact that the technology has been used now also is a new way of doing business. It is, of course, one may argue, a bit of a windfall for the technological companies. Telstra is buying Digicel, as we know. It's an open secret. In our discussions with Telstra since last year, we've been talking to them about the BPO sector also. Telstra does outsource a lot of work. A lot of their work was actually, the contracts they had was out in Philippines and in India. People now like to bring those businesses closer to home, and Fiji, of course, is very close to home for them. So we see enormous potential in that space. A number of tax incentives have been put in place also in anticipation of the growth of the BPO sector. So, for example, there's a 20-year tax-free holiday if you're a BPO company. You get a 20-year tax-free holiday. You also have, if somebody who constructs a building where 90% of the floor space will be leased out to a BPO company, will have a 13-year holiday on the income that they generate from the leasing of those buildings. So strategically, a number of incentives have been put in place. For us, of course, in the next stage, there's still a number of variables, despite the fact that we have one of the highest rates of vaccination in the developing world. Nobody has paid a single cent for the vaccine. This is due to the diplomatic efforts that government has. The Prime Minister's Minister of Foreign Affairs talked to our bilateral partners. We went out to World Bank and ADB because the moment the word vaccine was mentioned, we knew that if you're a developing country, your opportunity of getting a vaccine quickly was actually reduced because you don't necessarily have the wealth and the buying power of larger countries. So we pushed ourselves to the front of the queue. So we had COVAX. They gave us about 4,000 shots. Then the Indians came along, gave us 100,000 doses. Then the Aussies came along, the Kiwis came along, and of course, now the Americans are participating. So all of those sort of strategic efforts put in place has put up in a good position where we now open up the borders the 1st of December. People are going back to work. We need to obviously ensure that we still ride that new wave. There's still a lot of variables, like I said, we're not sure about. Whether it's the rise in commodity prices globally, as you saw, the price of wheat has increased significantly. It's of course putting a lot of pressure on consumer goods. The war in Ukraine, of course, has meant a lesser supply of things like cooking gas, fuel, etc. And we will see, together with the freight costs, an escalation of costs, at least for the next 6 to 9 months. These are things beyond our control. We do not control the global market prices. But what we can do is, how do we mitigate those costs, or the increase in costs, when the goods land in Fiji? There are certain items, of course, they are price controlled, flour, fuel, etc. And that helps sort of keep a particular level of check, if you like. But nonetheless, you would still need to ensure that there is a particular level of income for ordinary Fijians, and thus, as you saw the announcement by the Minister for Employment a couple of weeks ago, doing a review of the minimum wage. There was no minimum wage in Fiji, some of you may know this, until only recently when the Bainimarama government introduced that. Yes, you had minimum wage for the 10 wage sectors, whether it's a waiter, whether it's a forklift driver, the electrician, the plumber, but there was never a minimum wage for, nationally. And that was introduced before 2014, and then it's been reviewed subsequently. The last review was done in 2018, and we had said that we'll review it every 2 years. 2020 should have been the last review. Of course, you can't do a review in the middle of a pandemic when over 100,000 people have lost their jobs. would have been a distortion of the market, and therefore you cannot get good or the right figures. So now that the borders have opened up, we've got this professor from Australia who does the independent assessment for us. We know that, for example, the garment industry is very wary of salary rises because they believe that if the wages increase too much, they won't be able to compete with the countries of likes of Bangladesh and various or Vietnams of the world. So it's a balancing act. We need to be able to see what are the different factors. We've seen some employers who don't mind a wage increase, a substantial wage increase. On the other hand, of course, we are looking at various other policy initiatives that we can sort of inculcate within the public service to ensure that we have a change in the approach to services that are delivered. COFRCS has been a breath of fresh air, and that type of sort of approach to customer service is something that we've actually been trying to promote. We announced in Parliament a few weeks back saying that we have to actually roll out a policy so that civil servants know how to deliver customer service, which in itself is, in a way, from a perspective, quite tragic that we have to teach people to say sir, madam, or Mr. or Ms. by their name, or even if you go and see a doctor, whether you go to the lands department. But those level of service must increase. We need to ensure there's a lot better communications, in particular in times when there's a lot of subjectivity, a lot of variability in the market. We need to ensure that different agencies are able to communicate way ahead of time, whether it's a water cut, whether it's electricity cut, whether it's in terms of policy changes. A lot more communication needs to take place. So overall, from a government perspective, our objective is to ensure that there's stability in policies, and which there has been. In fact, that is what led to the 9 years of growth. But there needs to be also consistency in those policies. We've made some adjustments, of course. You no longer pay stamp duties, the STT is completely gone, ECAL has been reduced by 5%. All of those initiatives put in place. You don't require a business license to start up a license or commence a license. The idea is to make things a lot more easier, a lot more robust. But of course, at the same time, we also need various checks and balances. We like everybody in Fiji to get a tax identification number. We need people to have the right name to be registered so we know who they are, as opposed to a person having a multiplicity of identities. Those are the types of things, obviously, from a government perspective, we need to ensure actually does take place. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've had the budget consultations. I assume a lot of you would have made submissions for the mini budget. The mini budget is to be delivered on the 24th of March at 7:30 p.m. Because it's a mini budget, it gets debated the next day, and God willing gets approved that day. On the 25th of March, it should get approved. And then, of course, the mini budget comes into effect. It lasts until the 31st of July. Our financial year is from the 1st of August to the 31st of July, so then another new budget has to be delivered for the next financial year, which is 2022-2023. And, we look forward to the discussions this afternoon. It is a very different group of people that I've been meeting, because we were in northwest of Vanuatu and Savusavu, and you know what they're like in Savusavu, and then Lambasa, and of course we were in Nandi and Lautoka and various other places. And there's been a lot of sort of, grassroots submissions. Basic things like people who are on social pension, who get $100 a month, because many of them have never worked in their life for anybody formally, so they get $100 a month pension. But they also got, for example, a e-ticketing card, which was reduced actually to $10 a month. So they're saying, can you please increase it from $10 to $20? Those kind of basic submissions we are receiving. But I think there's a healthy appreciation of where we are, what we are going through. And in the same way, I think it is critically important, in particular for the business community, to rally together to be able to see us through this particular phase. We are now coming out of this. Of course, Ukraine and Russia, we do not know what will come out of that. We do know the impact of it currently. We do not know whether it's going to snowball into a bigger conflict. But in this part of the world, obviously, there's still various challenges for us. We still have climate change. In the COVID period, we had a number of cyclones. Those of you may have traveled recently between Singatoka and Nandi, you would have seen the entire highway near Kambisi gone. And that's not even through a cyclone. That's essentially just through heavy downpour. There's so much saturation. the earth just cannot handle it. So for us, those are some real challenges. Some of you are old enough to know we used to get a cyclone, once every 10 years. I remember Cyclone Bibi in 1972. The next one was in the early 80s sometime. Now if you don't get 3 cyclones in a year, you think something's wrong. So that's the situation we are in. So for us, those are some of the risks that of course are beyond our control. And we need to be able to meet those costs. We also at the same time need to build resilience into our infrastructure. From a liquidity perspective, of course, Rabi won't give you very good interest rates if you want to put term deposit. Money, the banks are flush with money, frankly. Maybe ANZ is it, but they are. But that's the position we wanted to be in. We've also borrowed more from offshore in the past 2 years than previously. Normally our borrowing mix is 70-30, in other words 70% onshore, 30 offshore, give or take 5%. But this time we have it borrowed more heavily, of course, from offshore, which meant that more money has come into the system, more new money has come into the system, liquidity is relatively high, and our foreign exchange reserves are very stable. We have over 8 months worth of imports as far as the reserves are concerned. So from that angle, of course, we don't have an issue, and we need to be able to continue to protect that position. And the coming together of the business community and different commerce, I think, we cannot take these things individually or individualistically. We need to be able to ensure that you come together as an organization, as a group of people, and have more foresight as to where we want to be in the next 2 or 3 years' time, and how in fact we can get back the pre-pandemic rates of growth, pre-pandemic rates of business activity and indeed robustness. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation to the Chamber of Commerce. We look forward to your discussion. Vinaka, thank you.